Hello, welcome back to the Instech podcast. Zoya here, and this week Robin is joined by Harris and Arved, who are the co-founders, 2 out of the 3 who founded Novee, and who are also thoughtful operators in the new wave of verticalized AI for specialty insurance. From meeting at Deloitte to landing early pilots, they focused on insight first, automation second, and on earning underwriters' trust when every submission is different. Today they unpack the real pain points, triage versus deep risk assessment, aggregation checks, and why an LLM wrapper won't cut it in enterprise. So can AI help you improve data and process before the big transformation lands? How quickly can teams get value without ripping out the stack? And what shifts as follow capacity commoditizes and lead underwriting becomes the edge? Plenty to chew on, so settle in, press play, and enjoy.
Today's Instech podcast is a double act. It features the 2 co-founders of Novee, Harris Khan and Arved. Welcome both. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Robin. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Robin.
Now, you're co-founders, but tell me who does what?
So I'm the CEO and Arved is the Chief Product Officer. Although that said, in a startup of our size, we all double or triple hat. So my focus really is mostly on the commercial side, so shaping our strategy, managing investor and client relationships, driving growth. But I'm also deeply involved as well on the product side and making sure that we bring our sort of ideas to market.
Arved, how do you spend your day?
Yeah, Robin, I look after product. So really it comes down to understanding our users, which are the underwriters, and figure out what their pain points and problems are, and then working with them on the design, the user experience. But yeah, as Harris mentioned, at the stage of our company, we're pretty much involved in most things in the business.
And then how did you 2 meet?
Yeah, so we both worked at Deloitte as management consultants in the insurance consulting practice. And we kept crossing paths, various different insurance projects, workshops, etc. And I think it was one day we grabbed lunch. We realized we were both working on different underwriting projects with different clients. We started to compare notes and we were just seeing very similar pain points and challenges across the market. And I think that was the real kind of spark for where kind of Novee began.
But Arved, why didn't you stay at Deloitte? I hear all that and you recognise the pain points and then you can charge yourselves out at, I don't know what it is these days, £800 an hour to tell everybody how to fix these pain points. But you walked out and decided to fix them in another way. Why take that risk?
So I think it was always on the back of my mind to try to do my own business. And I've seen different friends either work for startups or start their own thing. But there was never quite the right moment. So I think last year, things just came together. So on the one side, Deloitte is really good at giving you a view of different insurers, their pain points, and had a pretty good understanding of that. But then also the timing was right in terms of the technology. So the advent of large language models and the possibilities of that. But then most importantly, I think we found a pretty strong team and a pretty strong co-founders. And then I took the plunge.
Harris, you were never a consultant, were you? Because you've done a little bit of entrepreneurship in your previous life already. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think growing up, I've always been pretty entrepreneurial. My dad's an entrepreneur, so I think there was probably some level of inevitability to it. During my master's, actually, I was leading business development for a VC-backed startup company. I think that just really gave me the bug to do something on my own. So after graduating, I launched my first company, which was extracting property data from satellite and street view imagery. And that was my first touch point into insurance, where I realized how little data was really being used in property underwriting. So the long story short of it was we raised some funding, ran for about a year and a half, committed probably all of the cardinal sins you would do as a founder. And yeah, it was a great learning experience, shaped a lot really of how we approach Novee. And when that company ended, I joined Deloitte. Very lucky to work under a partner there called Mark Patterson, who really gave me a lot of freedom to keep that kind of entrepreneurial streak alive. And yeah, like you said, Robin, it was inevitable that I was going to do another company. It was just a matter of the timing and right team and right product idea.
So that's a good time to talk about Novee. Why Novee? What does it do? The secondary question, why start there?
So I think our starting point was that we saw a lot of the underwriting transformation efforts in the market. And often they were focused on the operational side of underwriting, right? It was all about how do we standardize decision making? How do we standardize process? How do we standardize data? But actually that didn't really help the underwriters, because I think there's just so much nuance in the decision making, and it's very hard to standardize these different classes of business. So I think that was our starting point. So that's where we wanted to focus Novee, is really start with the underwriter and recognize that what they do is distinct and each business has their own unique features to it. So that was the starting point, start with the underwriter. And then at its core, what Novee does is it's an AI assistant to the underwriter, and it solves two problems. The first is deliver insights to the underwriter. So how can we help the underwriter get a very clear understanding of the submission and the risk that the broker sent to them, and be able to then make a decision on whether to proceed or not. And we started with triage, but then we very quickly moved into kind of the deeper risk assessment where we think there's greater value. And then the second part is task automation. So really underwriting is death by 1,000 small tasks that the underwriter has to do in order to get the submission over the line. So once you understand the submission and you can extract information from the submission reliably, you can then start to automate some of these tasks. Think about aggregation checks, comparing slips, populating pricing tools, those sorts of things that are part of the underwriting process, but they're not really the kind of core and value that the underwriter brings.
So how do you get going? You have this idea, you recognise the power of the tech, but you need to be paid and you want to run a successful business. How do we go from good idea to actually Novee up and running?
So we knew from the outset we needed a strong technical co-founder to bring the product to life. It's all very good having ideas, but really it's a matter of execution. And we were very lucky to meet Ehsan, who had been a senior software engineer at Tractable, also worked at companies like OVO Energy and Hargreaves Lansdown. And even more luckily for us, he was very passionate about insurance. So we started small. We built an MVP on submission triage, as Arvid mentioned before. And we were testing two things. Is the tech as good as we thought it was, and could it unlock value in the way that we had anticipated? But also it was a bit of a test on how we all work together. And once we ticked those boxes, we decided to go full-time on Novee from September last year. And we're very lucky to land our first pilot with Atrium's terrorism team, who've just been incredibly supportive and a brilliant early design partner. So yeah, we bootstrapped for the first few months to make sure that we're really trying to solve the right problems. Worked very closely with underwriters, iterated our solution. And as we started to get more traction in the market, we decided to raise our seed round earlier in the year to really scale things up.
You able to share details? Where did you go for the seed round and how much did you get?
So we raised 1.6 million, which was a lot more actually than we'd initially went out to market for. I think a lot of investors are seeing huge opportunities in insurtech, but I think they've been burnt before by issues around long sales cycles, certain insurtechs in the past not being able to really scale. So we really had to overcome some of those hesitations that those investors had. And I think what we've tried to do is really start small, incrementally building out our capabilities. We don't have this huge grand vision that we're going to really revolutionize the entire market. So I think that kind of pragmatic approach really helped investors see, yes, this is where we are today, but also around the potential of this is where we can go in the future.
So I think you raised 6 months or so ago. Are those investors going to be happy, do you think? If you've made good progress, are you spending their money wisely?
I think so. It's gone probably better than we'd anticipated. We're now live with 3 carriers across terrorism, property, and power and utilities lines. And we're now looking to expand into other classes from there. We've also got pilots mobilizing and running with some kind of large global carriers, which is really exciting. And I think really it's been quite an organic journey. Each step's been built on the last. We've really been guided by what underwriters were struggling with and the feedback they were giving us, and slowly and incrementally improving our product based on their feedback directly. And it's been incredibly rewarding to see underwriters using the product, seeing it improve, and essentially seeing their reaction from the improved features that we've delivered.
Well, then how about the tech? Any details about what you've selected, what you've built? Is it now sort of enterprise grade, or is there still work you feel that needs to be done?
So there's always work that needs to be done, right? But I do think we're in a pretty good position, and I think the platform is enterprise ready now. I think if I focus in on two challenges in particular with the technology, and they're very distinct features of the specialty market and London in particular. So the first is just the volume and inconsistency of information and the different formats that these submissions come in on. There's really no submission that looks like another submission. That's a real challenge, but that also means why our product is valuable. And then I think the second and maybe the more complex one is the complexity of the business and the many edge cases that exist within this market. It's almost like every submission is an edge case somewhere. So from a tech standpoint, what does that mean? AI or large language models are really just a small part or a part of our product. So actually most of our engineering efforts in the last few months have gone into what we might call information retrieval, right? So if you think of a submission as hundreds of pages of information to answer a particular question or find a particular insight, what are the specific information you select from that vast body of information to then ask a LLM a question to get it to answer a question. And there are different techniques of how to do that, but that's where a lot of effort has gone in the past few months. And then I guess the cynical way of looking at it is just a ChatGPT wrapper? And I think the answer to that is a wrapper might get you there 80% on 80% of the submissions. But that's not really being enterprise ready, and that's not good enough for the use cases that we're looking at.
So if I put myself in the seat of an underwriter and I've got a submission and I'm using Novee, what is the underwriter enabled to do that he wouldn't otherwise be able to do? You're going way beyond just extracting and structuring. Give me some sort of sense of the insights that they like to get.
Yeah, so this comes back down to the two things that we do, right? The first is give them insights, and the second is to automate. If we start with the insights, the kind of experience we want underwriters to have using our platform is that kind of, oh, wow moment, which is, oh, wow, I would have missed that if I hadn't used Novee. Or based on what Novee is showing me, I'm actually now going to make a different decision that I would have made without the platform. But then the next part is, okay, what does that actually mean? In the context of that submissions, the limits, the locations, the perils, etc., does that mean this is a good risk or this is a bad risk, and why? That's where we're getting to, and we're continuing to evolve the platform to get to that level of insight. And then in terms of the automation, extraction is the first step, get the information, but then actually the underwriter doesn't care about extracting that data. They want a particular task to be done. And those tasks, they involve business logic, they involve integrations into the wider ecosystem, aggregation checks, for example, you need to be able to speak to the aggregation system. And then most importantly, you also need to be able to trust the output. Actually, one thing we found is it's better to automate 50% of a task with a very high degree of confidence, and the underwriter doesn't even need to look at it. And the other 50%, you just say, no, you got to do that because we can't confidently do it. So how do you build that trust into the output that an underwriter can truly hand off something to the platform and the AI?
What does a typical implementation look like? I'm assuming that based on what you're saying, to some extent, one is involving the underwriter or the business user in the sales process, and they're keen to get their hands on this stuff. How long does it take from the moment that someone signs on the dotted line? How long before they're up and running with a working solution that the enterprise is happy with?
A key principle for us has been how do we deliver value as quickly as possible without having any other form of dependencies on any other systems, etc. So it depends on the use case, but if we speak about kind of providing more actionable risk insights, we're talking a couple of weeks. All we need to do is have a couple of workshops to define the requirements in terms of what do you consider in your risk appetite, what do you consider in terms of your risk assessment insights, and then we would help them configure that into the platform in natural language. So we'd expect within kind of 3 or 4 weeks for them to be completely up and running and starting to get value immediately. Obviously, when it comes to some of the use cases around automation of certain tasks, there is a dependency on integrations with internal systems, etc. But we'd always think about doing that second. The first thing for us is get some value, get a tool working into the hands of users. And more often than not, that's already there post the proof of concept or pilot we do, because we try to make it as representative to what they're already looking for within that time period. And then as we get into implementation, it becomes more about how do we integrate into other systems? How do we make their workflows as seamless as possible?
You mentioned earlier the number of edge cases, and it always used to be the case that people would say they couldn't possibly use technology like this because the specialty market was unique and every risk was different, and that there was no sense in which you could automate in that context. And that was the sort of funny thing that went on in the motor and personal lines space. But it's quite clear to me that people are embracing this, and it's not the sort of C-suite led, it's led by writers themselves. 3 years ago, there would have been serious cultural barriers to this kind of stuff. And underwriters said, I see bots coming and I'm not going to allow them to take my job. But they're clearly embracing what you're doing. Tell me about that. And what I'm particularly intrigued to know more about, I think, is the sales process, because it's underwriters who need to get the power of this, and underwriters who then they need to make the case internally. That is a big shift from where we all were 2 or 3 years ago. So is that a sort of sensible analysis? Are you seeing that?
Absolutely. So what we've actually found is underwriters are pretty pragmatic, right? So they're there to do a job, they're busy, and they have to deliver, whatever the plan is that they have to deliver. So I think if something feels like a distraction to them, where they're not going to see any value quickly to them, then they're obviously going to be skeptical. But I think if you can demonstrate that very quickly you can help them solve a problem that they recognize, we found that the adoption has been actually pretty quickly, right? I feel sometimes this kind of skepticism of underwriters has been used as an excuse for maybe not solving the right problem or not solving it in the right way. I think if we were to say, look, we're going to automate the whole thing, people would probably be a lot more skeptical. But that's what we're not here to do, right? We're focused on particular parts of what an underwriter do to help them do their job better.
I get a sense that it's a good time to be a startup in insurance right now. There was all that fuss 10, 12 years ago and disruption and so on. And then the focus has moved into sort of operational efficiency, automation. But there's been a sense for a while, I think, that you need some scale and credibility to do that. Whereas if I look at what you're doing and how quickly you've been embraced, I think there's a theme within the market that people are very happy to allow people like you who have a very specific use case to come in and solve a particular problem. And they know that the big tech companies aren't going to solve that and that they can't solve it. Is that a thing? I kind of feel this is a good time to be doing very specific things with the latest technology.
I would definitely agree. I think there's a big focus now in the industry generally around verticalized AI solutions. We've seen that more general AI, LLM capabilities or solutions or platforms doesn't necessarily work well for the type of use cases that we're talking about and across the type of class of businesses that we're solving for. So for us, it was a matter of how do we create a very specific verticalized AI solution which maps to how commercial and specialty underwriters operate. And I think, at least from a market perspective, but also even from an investor perspective, they do see the value and they're making big bets on startups being able to solve narrower problems. And I guess to answer your second question around being embraced by customers, I think we're not trying to be an all-encompassing underwriting platform which does everything and requires a huge investment up front with a large-scale transformation program sitting behind it. I think many insurance companies are now looking to be a lot more pragmatic. They're trying to figure out how do we deliver quick value to underwriters? How do we engage solutions which provide modular capabilities to plug and play into our existing systems and processes? And whilst they do their longer term transformation programs, whether that's updating their processes, their data, their systems, it doesn't mean that the underwriters look at the product roadmap or the transformation roadmap and figure out that they're not going to get any value until 2028. That's just not flying anymore. I think underwriters are clamoring for these sorts of solutions because they've had a taste of it when ChatGPT came out.
I agree completely with what you say. I like the idea of highly verticalized solutions, but you won't be the only one. And then you can see an underwriter would end up with 5 or 6 of these things that all do separate jobs, and they represent a toolkit that enables them to be super efficient. But that assumes that at some point the organizations you're working with sort of embrace this stuff and start to create the architecture and a framework and a governance around a proliferation of verticalized tools. Is that starting to happen?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both top-down and bottom-up strategies we're seeing in the market. And I think to further elaborate on that, I think insurance companies are still trying to wrap their heads around what their AI strategy is in terms of the types of use cases they're looking for, in terms of the types of governance they need to wrap around it, and in terms of the processes and the setup and makeup of the organization and how AI will be run. But I think what they have done quite pragmatically is let businesses bottom up identify and define some of those key pain point areas, reach out to CIOs or IT and ops teams to say, this is the problem that we need solving for. We've had a taste of it in terms of co-pilot rollouts, in terms of uses of ChatGPT. Is there a more specialized solution that can help solve our problem? So I think what we're seeing in the market is lots of individual business units willing to engage with AI vendors like us to really try and fix their problems. I don't think it's a big enough problem yet where the CIO has had to wrap around all of these different various AI solutions, but we're anticipating that might occur in the next year and a half or so.
I was going to say, it feels certainly not a 25 problem. It may not even be a 26 problem, but it's going to be a 27 problem for sure.
Just to add to that, I think if you were to try to define a holistic strategy right now with the vendors of choice, etc., that'd be outdated in 6 months. The field is just evolving so quickly right now with new capabilities coming online. So I think it makes sense the strategy right now should be to learn and wait and implement small wins where you can. And then as things stabilize a bit more, then you can think about, okay, what is the enterprise strategy around AI and how we're going to control and govern this more holistically.
And Harris, what comes next? You haven't spent all that 1.6 million already. What's it going on? What are you working on? Any sense of what the rest of 25 and 6 holds?
Yeah, the focus now is really about building the team. So AI engineering capabilities, product management, customer success. It's going to be a key priority to ensure that we move fast and support the clients that we already have at scale. We're already getting a number of feature requests to expand across different classes of businesses. So we want to make sure that we do as good of a job as possible for the clients that we do have. But of course, we've got an eye out for some further opportunities, particularly with some of the larger carriers that we're currently piloting with. So we want to make sure that we set the right foundations for our company to ensure that we can serve those clients, deepen our relationships, and really make sure that we deliver real lasting value before we try and grow too quickly.
Are you going to focus on just making existing processes and the decisioning that is involved in those processes better? Or do you think there's some way in which those processes or the way in which specialty insurance is done might evolve over the coming years?
Yeah, so I think what's been going on for a while now is this bifurcation between lead and follow underwriting, and in particular how follow underwriting will be done. So I think a lot of the innovation in the follow space will mean that capacity is deployed a lot more efficiently, and to an extent, follow capacity will be commoditized, right? So what that also means is, I think for insurers to continue to outperform going forward, they probably need to have a competitive advantage in lead underwriting and be able to lead in certain classes of business. And I think that's where we are playing. So I think coming back to your question, will the kind of placement method change in lead underwriting? And I actually think our hypothesis right now is that you don't need to fundamentally change your placement and the value chain there. But actually within that, you can achieve a lot of the things that people are looking to achieve, at least when it comes to lead underwriting.
I think, Robin, to riff off a bit, currently people think of the underwriting process as quite linear. We've been involved in defining process maps. And as you mentioned, there are certain steps that underwriters need to go through. And we see quite a lot of consistency across carriers on what those steps are. The way we see ourselves operating is, yes, we can integrate and embed our AI into your existing process. But we also think there's an opportunity to redesign how underwriters actually interact with those processes, or in our case, not interact with those processes. And a really good example is, at the moment, submissions are landing into inboxes. From there, it either goes into a PAS or a workbench, and then you go and do your sanctions checks, your clearance checks. Then there's data extraction into your pricing tools, etc. The way we think about it is, as a submission lands in an underwriter's inbox, how do we just automatically process that submission according to the insights, according to the processes that might want to be generated or automated? And as soon as they land into their inbox, they already see this risk you should be focusing on because it's in appetite, it's high quality. And by the way, we've also checked your ag position and this is what it is. And also these are the good and bad things about this particular risk. We see a kind of redesigning of how underwriters will be actually underwriting. And that's what we're trying to do, both interact with it within their existing processes and systems. But as that evolves and as underwriting organizations are looking to redesign potentially that entire interaction pattern, we see ourselves fitting and mapping our solution to adapt to that.
You've listened to enough of our podcast to know how it works. We always give, in your case, you could have 2 goes at this, a chance to leave the audience with one final thought. Arvid, why don't you go first?
One thing that we're hearing a lot is this idea of you got to fix your data, you got to fix your processes, and once it's all neat and you have arrived at your target architecture, that's when you can start using AI effectively. I think we think about this the other way around. I actually think AI is a great tool to get you to a point where your data is better, your processes are better, your systems are better, right? I think if you wait to deliver that big transformation before you start using AI, you're going to be very much behind the curve. So I think the time is to use that now and invest in it and make that part of your kind of organizational transformation going forward.
I like that. Harris, what do you say?
Yeah, I think there's an extension to what Arvid mentioned, which is a big part of the core value or capability of AI is to handle complex workflows and unstructured data. That's what makes underwriting so challenging. So why not leverage it? And to Arvid's point, we don't need to wait multi-years to deliver underwriters some value. We can deliver value today, and let's go ahead and do it.
Well, the whole idea of this podcast is to keep spreading the word. This tech is so much better than most people realise. And if they could get their hands on it, they would be blown away. Well done, you two. You've done a great job. You haven't been going much more than a year. You've come a long, long way since then. And you're clearly making very good progress. You should be very proud of yourselves. We're going to get you back in a year or two, and you can come and tell us by that time you've raised some huge, great Series A round, and you're on your way to wealth and riches. But in the meantime, keep up the good work.
Thank you, Robin. Really appreciate the opportunity of being on the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Well, if you've made it this far, then I'm pretty sure you found that as interesting as I did. The Instech podcast comes out every Sunday morning, where we spotlight the latest news, leading voices, and freshest updates across insurance that you need to know about. If you would like to take part in these conversations, head to www.instech.co to find out how you can join our network and be a part of the insurance intelligence for the curious.